Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And we have with us tonight the former coal miner, now Conservative Party chairman, Patrick McLaughlin. The Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, who nominated Jeremy Corbyn for leader in 2015, Rebecca Long-Bailey. The founder of the counter-extremism organisation Quilliam, Majid Nawaz. Lord Sugar's advisor on The Apprentice for a decade, now the host of Countdown, Nick Hewer. And the co-editor of the website The Conservative Woman, Laura Perrins. And I'm sure I don't need to remind you that if you want to join in the debate from home or wherever you are, you can do it either on Facebook or on Twitter, or you can text us on 83981. And if you're doing that, you push the red button on your screen, you can see what else is being tweeted. Let's have our first question from Christian Coventry, please.
Should Trump's state visit to the UK be blocked in light of his recent immigration ban?
Patrick McLaughlin.
No. President, we've made very clear that we disagree with the executive order that he issued last week, but he is the President of the United States. The United States is the most important trading country for us, and I think it would be wrong to withdraw the ban after it has now been extended to him.
To withdraw the ban?
Withdraw the invitation.
Withdraw the ban? People would like the ban there. Rebecca Long-Bailey, what do you think?
Withdraw the invitation.
I think that history is going to judge us by our actions on this. And we're right to foster this special so-called relationship with America. They're our best friend at the end of the day. But do you know what best friends do? They tell each other the truth in a respectful way. And that's what we should have done this week. And unfortunately, we weren't quick enough off the mark.
But what would you... OK, what would you have the Prime Minister do? So you remember that invitation I gave you? Doesn't count anymore.
I don't think it's appropriate to be condoning Donald Trump's values. The Muslim ban that he put forward was divisive. It sowed hatred. It was completely irrational. And it was done on Holocaust Memorial Day of all days. And a quote has haunted me since last week in light of what's happened, and it's a quote by Primo Levi, a Holocaust survivor, and he said that monsters exist, but there are too few in number to be truly dangerous. More dangerous are the common men, the functionaries who are ready to believe and act without asking questions. Now was the time we needed to ask questions.
OK, Laura Perrins.
No, of course the invite shouldn't be withdrawn because President Trump hasn't done anything wrong. What his first moral and constitutional duty is to protect the citizens of the United States. And that's what this measure does. It's not an anti-Muslim measure, it's an anti-terrorist measure on 7 states, a list that President Obama had already been brought up. And if I may just take I have a really serious moral issue with this measure being compared to the Holocaust. And I think it's very important to draw the distinction. What the Holocaust was doing was state agencies acting against their own citizens, rounding up their own citizens and liquidizing them, men, women and children. What the President of the United States is doing is protecting his own citizens by saying to foreign citizens, first of all, you don't have a right to come here, and secondly, I'm not happy with the vetting procedure that's in place, and therefore we're going to pause any visa you have for 90 days in order to protect all of the United States citizens, including the 3 million Muslims there. And I think what Labour are doing is essentially standing on the grave of 7 million Jewish deaths to make a political point. And I think it's outrageous.
I'll come to you. All right, man here. Yes. Far away.
My question is for Laura. I'm an Iraqi Kurd who lived in the United Kingdom for 15 years. The Kurdish people have been praised around the world for being the most effective force fighting ISIS. The Kurdish people are carrying Iraqi passport. The ban affects the Kurdish people that Donald Trump said that are the most effective force fighting ISIS.
How do you feel about the ban when it was announced?
The ban, in my opinion, Donald Trump, as a president of the United States, is allowed to do whatever decision he does, but he cannot say you are at the front of fighting ISIS, you are the most effective nation fighting terrorism, then 1 minute and the next minute saying you are in the same box with them, you are categorized as safe.
And just briefly, do you think he should come? Do you think he should come on a state visit to Britain? Do you think he should come to Britain as a guest of the Queen?
I don't think so, no. That's my personal opinion.
And you in the third row there, and then I'll come to you, Nick.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but people who want to come into America, they have to gain a visa, and that means that they are a temporary citizen of that country. So if he is invoking the right of these temporary citizens, who he's so-called wants to protect, like, how can that be right?
So what's your view about the state visit?
He shouldn't come. He's been very decisive and institutionally racist.
Nick Hewer, institutionally racist and
I
very
think
divisive.
this question falls in two parts. The invitation and the ban. The invitation. Theresa May rushes off to Washington. I'm first, special relationship. And let's invite him, let's capture his heart, let's make sure that, you know, we've got this great relationship. Donald Trump is a shark. He doesn't know what he did yesterday. He's not altogether sure what he's doing today. He's eating for the day. And if she thinks that she's got a deal, then she's sorely mistaken. On the ban front, I don't know how many people here read Patrick Coburn's piece. A great journalist who is recognised as being an authority on all this said that Trump has turned himself into the greatest recruiting sergeant for ISIL, ISIS and Al-Qaeda and al-Nusra. Because what he has done with that long-winded signature of his is to turn every Muslim in the world and question where they stand in the eyes of one of the greatest nation in the world, and they think less of the states now, and that inexorably leads to recruits joining ISIS rather than fighting ISIS, and that's my view.
Majid.
I think there is two parts to this. I agree with Nick that I agree with Nick. Says a Lib Dem. I think there are two parts to this. One is the ban, one is the state visit. But before we get to those two parts, I think it's very important to acknowledge the fact of the aftermath of what's happened in Quebec. 6 worshippers were killed in a mosque a couple of days after completely irresponsible noises were made by the president of the most powerful country in the world. And those 6 are real human beings. Aziz ad-Din Sufyan, Khalid Belkacemi, Abdul Karim Hassan, Abu Bakr al-Thabti, and Mamadou and Ibrahim Bari were human beings killed while performing an act of worship by a far-right supremacist who decided, being a fan of this sort of rhetoric, that these sorts of people, 2 of them immigrants to Canada, need to be eliminated off the face of the earth. And so consequences of language are very real. I know Trump doesn't call it a Muslim ban, but all of his rhetoric up until the election itself was using the words, we're going to stop Muslims coming into this country. And then the executive order itself excludes Christians. So you would forgive people for using words like Muslim ban, even though it's not technically correct. Let's not also dance on the grave of those 6 on a technicality by saying it's not a Muslim ban at the end of the day.
You don't know.
Let Laura speak for it. Let Laura just give us comment.
You seem to know a lot about a crime that is just committed, and obviously it's a horrific thing that happened. But you have no evidence to say what you've just said.
About
now,
what? Sorry.
Just be about the terrible crime in Quebec. But just be very clear, this is not a Muslim
hang on,
ban.
what part of what I've said is wrong?
Just let me finish. Nobody
what part of what I've said is
Well, hang on. I think
right.
she's saying that the cause of it being what Donald Trump did is not proven. That you said that, but there's no evidence for that.
There's no evidence for that. There are 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, and this affects 7 countries. Those 7 countries are Iraq, Syria, Iran, Sudan, Libya, Somalia and Yemen. They were designated by Obama as terrorist enclaves.
Complete mind.
And The President, as I said, has a constitutional and moral right to protect US citizens from the real terrorist threat that's coming out of those countries. And to say otherwise is merely grandstanding and saying things that you've no evidence for at all.
Obama noted those 7 countries on a specific threat at that time.
Yes, the CIA
and
has
none
said
of the
that
nationals from those countries have ever
yes, they have. Ohio.
cost any life.
Well,
excuse
the
me.
Ohio massacre was from a Somali immigrant.
Mr. Atta and his pals were Egyptian and Saudis. Are they on the list? No.
So you're saying the list isn't long
Reid was
enough?
blowing his shit.
It's not long enough.
This is ridiculous.
Wait. Nick, you finish your point, and I'll come back to you, Majid. And then I want to go to other members of the audience. Yes, you finished.
Sorry. Perhaps we should be on that ban because Robert Reid was crossing the Atlantic trying to explode his shoe and take that aircraft down. Excuse me?
Britain isn't an unstable country. All of those 7, apart from Iran, are war-torn countries. Britain is a stable country. I mean, it's a ridiculous thing to say. And the fact that Britain isn't included and all the European Muslims aren't included and the vast majority of the world's Muslims are not included in this ban just goes to show how wrong it is to say that it's not an anti-Muslim ban, it's an anti-terrorist ban. And something needs to be done about ISIS.
Laura.
They're a barbaric organisation and there's no way that they should be allowed to infiltrate refugees and be a threat to the Western world.
I'm probably the only one on this panel who works every single day. You see, something needs to be done about ISIS. I'm probably the only one on this panel who has full-time, every single day, trying to do something about ISIS. And the fact is that the 7 countries that were named have not been responsible for any homegrown attack across Europe.
So he should wait
Can
until
I
they're
actually
dead
finish the
Americans.
point that I was going to make?
All right. I think everybody in the audience has heard a good deal from you two. I'd like to hear what their comments are on it. The woman there at the very back with spectacles. Yes, you, sir. Madam, rather. Go on.
While I agree with all that's said about Donald Trump, the invitation has been issued by Her Majesty the Queen. Surely we have to go along with her invitation and accept Mr. Trump and welcome him, even though we don't agree with it.
So this was going to be...
Okay, and all right, hold on. And you, sir, there, in the middle.
You mentioned the fact that maybe we should be on the ban. Do you know, I'm on the ban because as well as those 7 countries that you've quoted, add another 9 onto that as well. They ban any person who has a Jewish passport. And because I've actually got a Jewish stamp when I went to Israel, I'm not allowed to go to at least 8 of those particular countries that you've named as well. So the ban already exists for other people. So what Mr. Trump is doing, have we got any right to be lecturing others?
All right, and you, sir, over there. Thank you. And you? Yes?
It is clearly racist, and I agree with the panellist there who says this encouraged the attack on the innocent worshippers in the mosque in Canada. A lot of respectable politicians like Trump and like some closer to home have blood on their hands when they make statements which stir people up and appear to give them permission to attack Muslims and immigrants. And I think it's a disgrace. If Trump does come here, I can guarantee there will be such a turnout to let him know he is not welcome. It will be the biggest demonstration we've seen for years.
All right. Patrick McLaughlin, can what's your comment on what the former head of the Foreign Office said, that the ministers, you're in the cabinet, have put the Queen in a very difficult position, he wrote in the Times, by inviting Trump here at this time and with such alacrity?
Well, you're talking about Lord Ricketts and
yes.
what Lord Ricketts said. Look, Donald Trump is President of the United States. It is the start of his presidential time in office. He has just been elected. Nick just said in part of his answer to the first question, the United States is the greatest country, one of the greatest countries in the world. It is absolutely essential that we have a good relationship. And actually, by having that relationship, the Prime Minister was able to instruct both the Foreign Secretary and the Home Secretary to ensure that that ban did not apply to anybody with a British passport. So we did have influence, we will have influence. And it's no good everybody throwing their hands up and somehow saying the American people have got it wrong. The American people have elected President Trump, and we have to respect him as the head of state of a very important country, and we have to work with him. And I remember not dissimilar kinds of thinkings when Ronald Reagan first became President of the United States. The horror and shock that was being exposed by many people. He turned out to be one of the America's greatest presidents.
Are you predicting that for Donald Trump?
I'm not predicting anything. He's not been president yet for 10 days. I think we're 240 hours into his presidency. I think we should just wait.
Quite interesting. You've been counting.
Well, it's 10 days. It's 240 hours. So,
no, I think we must move on. We've got a lot of questions, and I want to try and get through them if we can, because the audience have put all these questions. They're there to be debated. But just before we move on, Torquay is where Question Time is going to be next week, and Glasgow the week after that. I'll give the details at the end, but on the screen now, you can see how to apply, but I will explain it later on. Dean Marshall, please. Let's have your question. Dean Marshall.
Should the 114 MPs who voted against the Brexit bill look for new jobs?
Should those who voted against the implementation of Article 50 yesterday be looking for new jobs on the ground, presumably your view is on the grounds that they've defied the will of the British people in the referendum? Rebecca.
Well, I think those MPs in many cases have made agonising decisions, especially if they were in Remain seats. I mean, ultimately my view is that I believe in democracy. I didn't campaign to leave the EU, I campaigned to remain, but I respect the will of the people. We had a democratic referendum and we need to respect that referendum, so that's why I voted to trigger Article 50 yesterday. But we have to realise that this issue didn't just divide parties, and it didn't divide the Houses of Parliament, it divided families. And now is the time, as politicians, whichever party we're in, our job now is to unify the country and demand the best deal we can possibly get, that's in the interests of the people, not in the interests of the wealthy elite, because we've already seen murmurings from Philip Hammond that he's threatening to turn us into a tax haven. We want a deal that benefits communities like Wallasey and like my community in Salford and Eccles that have been starved of investment for decades.
What about the question, though, which is whether people should be looking for new jobs? By failing to... a lot was said in the House of Commons about, apart from Ken Clarke on the Tory side, for instance, they all voted in favour because that was what the country decided in a referendum where everybody was entitled to vote.
In terms of looking for new jobs, as I've said, I think people made an agonising choice. They had to vote with their heart. They had to vote, in many cases, in line with what their constituency wanted them to do. But as I've said, the party position, certainly the Labour Party's position, was to uphold the democratic will of the people.
Okay.
Now, we'll take an empathetic approach and an understandable approach to the MPs that have voted against the party whip because they were put in difficult positions. But I think there's a lot of discussions going to be taking place over the next few weeks, and we've heard the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the agonising decisions that many people will have to make considering Brexit.
Okay, Laura.
Well, I'd separate your question out slightly. First of all, I think anybody whose constituency voted to leave and they voted against it should certainly resign because they're anti-democratic and not serving their own constituencies and defying the will of the people. And also anybody who had a migraine or passed in a sticky note, they should definitely resign.
Nicola.
Well, I cried myself to sleep when Sunderland fell, and I woke up in the morning with a sodden pillow because I was an absolute Remainer. But the truth of the matter is, there was a referendum, and the Remainers lost. And that's democracy, and sometimes it hurts, and sometimes it feels like a punch on the jaw. But you just got to live with it. And therefore, I would absolutely agree with Rebecca because, we've got to shut up, and we've all got to pull together. I think Corbyn, and I'm not a fan, to be quite honest with you, was right to put the three-line whip on his members, and those that decided to object, whether they should look for another job or not is up to them. But actually, when the people vote, go into a corner and have a cry, and then pull yourself together and go with the vote.
You, sir.
I think we should bear in mind that MPs are not mandated, they're representatives. So therefore, they should act in the way that they best believe represents the interests of their constituents. Now, that will be different depending on the constituency they represent. But I think they've got to follow their conscience.
But if they follow their conscience, surely, on the basis of what we know about the position of the House of Commons before the referendum, they'd have voted against Article 50.
Yeah, but they've obviously taken into account the result of the referendum, and they have made a calculation based on what they feel is right in those circumstances.
Well, some have and some haven't, because some have switched and some haven't.
Well, I know it depends on the person. I wouldn't want to put myself in their mind. If I'd been an MP, I would have voted against.
Patrick McLaughlin, you see, voted, was a Remainer, argued for Remain, didn't you?
Yes.
How did you square your conscience with voting with the Prime Minister?
Well,
was that a difficult decision for you?
It was a very straightforward decision because I voted for a referendum. No, I voted for a referendum, and I accepted the result of the referendum. And my constituency almost followed the nation. It was 52 to leave and 48 to stay in. So I followed what my constituents wanted. But as far as Labour MPs looking for another job, a number of them are. There's already 2 by-elections of people that are deserting the Labour Party. They can't get out quick enough. So as far as, and that's taking place in Stoke-on-Trent and Copeland. So some of them are. But I think if they actually voted for the referendum, then they are duty-bound to accept the result of the referendum. And the vote for the referendum was overwhelmingly in favour of it.
The woman up there on the left.
You must be having a laugh, asking me to just kind of sit in a corner and cry and make do with this decision. I'm a European citizen. Neither did I vote for this idiotic advisory referendum that has turned my life upside down. I have an English husband, I have a German-English child, and I can now see what I do with this and how I reconcile this shaking up to my identity that this referendum has caused. A referendum that has been campaigned on lies, on exaggeration, on do not listen to the experts. Are you kidding me? And now you're calling it the will of the people. This was not the will of the people. This was such a complex situation that should never have been decided like this, ever.
So you think the 17.5 million were deluded?
I think anyone who thinks that England will walk away from this divorce from the EU with a better deal than they have right now is delusional. Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Majid.
So, Jeremy Corbyn, between 1997 and 2010, Jeremy Corbyn was the MP that rebelled the most against the whip. I find this with a deep sense of irony, what's happening to him now with all of these front benchers rebelling against him. I don't think they should lose their jobs. I think actually perhaps they should find a new political party, frankly, because under Corbyn's leadership, I think there's a new schism, there's a new way of dividing British politics around the Leave and Remain debate, and I think many of those so-called, what they call moderate Labour MPs, are not Labour anymore. Labour is now a left-wing party, which it rightly should be, and the Tories are where they are on Brexit. I think that those MPs that aren't happy under Corbyn's leadership do genuinely need to find a new party. I think actually the opposition, I voted Remain, the opposition to leaving the European Union as well, though, do, frankly, need to start articulating a vision in a post-Brexit Britain.
Okay.
And I think it's just unfortunate that we're still talking about what happened in the past, as opposed to what's going to happen next.
Yes, sir.
Is conducting a parliamentary debate without a white paper not betraying the will of the people?
Conducting a parliamentary debate without a white paper?
Is conducting a parliamentary debate and having a vote on the European withdrawal bill not betraying the will of the people?
Why do you think it's betraying it?
I feel like it's unrepresentative that these people are voting on an issue that they have not been informed by certain committees, by select committees. There's not been a certain amount of scrutiny on this current situation.
Okay.
And it's been rushed through Parliament to meet this arbitrary March deadline, which personally I don't believe is correct.
Rebecca?
Do you know, we got that white paper today, and quite frankly, it wasn't worth the paper it was written on. It was very vague, it was very ambiguous, it didn't tell us much more than we know already. It just set out Theresa May's 12 points in a very ambiguous way. And what made it even worse, there were points that weren't even factually correct. There was a bar graph bar chart within the paper that stated that UK workers were going to get 14 weeks holiday. Now, you can imagine my office was beside themselves when they heard this, only to find out a couple of hours later that it was a misprint and it's actually 5.6 weeks. So if the government can't even get its white paper right, how can we trust them to get the deal out of the EU right?
All right, well, let's just, before we leave this, just let's briefly I want to take a question from James Fitzhenry, please. James Fitzhenry, about what actually is going on, because, well, it refers to what happened today.
In view of the Bank of England's revised growth forecast today of 2%, what's happened to Armageddon?
What's happened to Armageddon, which, Patrick, I have to remind you, was what your side was saying was going to happen. We were going to have emergency budgets, tax increases and all that. Now, none of that's happened.
No, it hasn't. And that's when the lady earlier on said that
they were lied to.
They were lied to. I think both sides of the argument didn't certainly put its case convincingly.
Did you anticipate things were going to go fine if we voted Brexit?
I was concerned about whether we would continue to get inward investment into this country. Actually, what has happened since Brexit is we have continued to get that inward investment.
Is it all rosy from now on, in your view?
There's going to be 2 years of negotiations once we've triggered Article 30. And the answer to the gentleman there is that the House of Commons voted yesterday for the principle of the second reading of the bill. There will be detailed committee stages for 3 days next week, and the bill also has to go to the House of Lords. I really don't think that we have been short of debate, and we're certainly not going to be short of debate.
You're not worried about the debate, it's about the outcome.
The gentleman made the point.
Yeah, but we're on to another point now, which is about whether the sun is shining, the clouds have all gone, all the things you feared haven't come to pass.
We still have not yet exited the European Union, but there is no doubt that the Bank of England, in some of its forecasts, were wrong, as the Governor has made clear today. He's given revived growth forecasts. So, look, the truth is, those of us who voted to remain, and I voted to remain, have got to accept that we lost the debate and we lost the vote. And we've now got to implement the will of the British people.
Yeah, we know that, but
you can't have a referendum and then say, oh, by the way, everybody got it wrong.
No,
so
not
let's
arguing that
ignore it.
point. You're arguing a different point. We're arguing about what's going to happen now. Nick Hewer.
Nothing's happened
Do you think everything's going... Well, I know, but looking ahead...
Nothing's happened.
Well, it has
The deal's
happened.
not
The
done.
growth forecast has gone from 1
but the
to 2%.
reality hasn't kicked in yet,
I
has
see.
it? Have the prices shot up? Are we...
No,
go on, Nick, you speak.
All I'm saying is that we won't know what the future holds until the deal's done with Europe. So it's no surprise that people are shopping away. Why wouldn't they be? What's changed? Nothing's changed. It hasn't happened yet.
So
only sentiment has happened.
No, a huge amount has changed. And remember that the Remain campaigners, I mean, this wasn't just a sort of civilised debate that went on before this campaign. It was a serious amount of bullying of the public in Britain to stay in the EU or else, and that particularly came from George Osborne and, I'm afraid, Mark Carney. We were told there'd be a punishment budget, and that didn't happen. We were told that growth would collapse, and that hasn't happened. Yet again, the Bank of England have upped their forecast. We were told that companies would flee the country, and this wasn't just after we left the EU. This was immediately after the referendum. We were given dark forecasts that Armageddon wouldn't happen. The people were bullied, the people didn't listen to them, they saw that the EU was in serious difficulties themselves, and they voted to regain control of their borders, and they were totally right.
And Laura, is this... Do you think that some say, well, this is just at the moment, and 2 years from now it's going to get tough again, and people will start to feel the pinch from leaving the EU?
I don't have a crystal ball.
Because that's an
I don't have a
economic
crystal ball, and unlike certain politicians, I'm not going to make promises or forecasts that I don't know anything about, unlike George Osborne. But I do have confidence in Theresa May, and it's very important to remember that Britain is in a much stronger position than the rest of continental Europe. Now, I wish continental Europe was stronger, but Italy is basically bankrupt. Greece is bankrupt. Spain is bankrupt. And when we were out of the EU, I can guarantee you the vast majority of people will see that it was a great decision for Britain. A great decision.
Majid, I come to you. Majid.
The truth is, look, and as a Remainer, the hands down, right? We lost, and the truth is, none of us know how it's going to turn out. And we shouldn't predict doom at this stage, because it may well turn out as a success. What I see at the moment is I see a vision, Theresa May's vision for Brexit and what she wants it to look like, what the Prime Minister wants it to look like. But what I don't see is that those who are still in the Remain camp, those who are still, beating that drum, frankly, we have to accept, A, that we lost, and B, what is the post-Brexit vision that those who are in the Remain camp have for how to make sure it is a success going forward, because frankly we have lost the debate. We've got to accept that, and there needs to be a liberal view as to what post-Brexit Britain looks like in the future that we can then use to hold the Prime Minister to account as to her view. There is no opposition at the moment.
The woman up there on the gangway in white. Yes, on the side there. Yes, you.
Yes, I was voting Remain, and at the very last minute I changed my decision and I went to leave. And the reason because of that is because of, I go to a supermarket and a banana is straight. I'm just sick of the silly rules that come out of Europe. And
have the bananas changed?
If you go to Aldi, they're a bit bent.
It was bananas, what did it, was it, for you?
No, it was more than bananas. It's the fact that there's opportunities out there that I feel that we need to see as a country.
And you're optimistic now? You're pleased the way you voted?
I am pleased the way I voted.
All right, Rebecca, just the last word briefly from you in terms of all the things that have happened today and the economic forecasting. Doesn't it look as if it's much better than people like you thought it was going to be?
Just to go back to the point the gentleman made about growth, I think firstly I'd say don't be fooled. And as Nick said, we haven't seen anything yet. Article 50 hasn't even been triggered. But if you look behind the growth figures, Mark Carney from the Bank of England said a few weeks ago that our improved growth was based on consumer spending. And in turn, that consumer spending has been fuelled by household debt. That household debt is being fuelled by people who are having to borrow in order to make ends meet because they're not earning enough to live on. We've had a lost decade again, the bank stated this, a lost decade on earnings. And even the Resolution Foundation brought out a report this week that said we were on course for the biggest increase in inequality since Thatcher. So our economy is not in fine shape for a Brexit, and the government needs to get its act together as quickly as possible.
But when you say on course, you know that the gap... Just for the record, the statistics show the gap is narrowing, but you may be right about the future. I want to go on, though, to another question, because as I said earlier on, we've got a lot of questions here. And this one from Stephen Smiley, please. Mr. Smiley.
What proposals would the panel put in place to curb the millions being wasted on health tourism each year?
Health tourism, yes, which is allegedly stacking up a bill of over 200, nearly 300 million, depending on the figures you get. People coming here using the NHS, not paying for it. What proposals would... Nick Hewer, what would you do? Don't sigh, that's not an answer.
I think what you do, actually, and I know it's hard and all the rest of it, but you've got to be paid for the service that you provide if you're not entitled to it as a national of this country. And I know that it's very difficult. I remember my father, years ago, was on holiday in France, and he was down near Arcachon, and when his appendix popped, and they wouldn't operate until they had the money. Now, we all thought this was very hard and very unfair, but actually, perhaps it was not an unrealistic thing to do. People have got to pay if they're not entitled to get it free. Having said that, I'm not suggesting that they should die on the operating table while somebody's waiting for him to sign the cheque, but there's somewhere in the middle there.
Laura Perrins.
Well, I mean, I agree with Nick. I mean, of course, it's very wrong that people are coming here to claim free health when they're not entitled to it. And I think it's really important to remember that it's not just a question of money, because people who are living in Britain and have been paying into a system are actually being denied treatment, in part because of health tourism. Okay, so operations are being cancelled because hospitals and hospital trusts aren't doing their best to recoup these costs. And I don't think that's very fair if you've paid into a system and then somebody, again, a citizen of a different country, comes in and then secures treatment that they've absolutely no entitle to, either morally or indeed financially. And it's a system that can't continue on, although I think it's part of the broader problem with the NHS overall.
that this is only a small part.
This is a small part of a much bigger problem.
Yeah, I just going to say that we agree with Nick. I was in Spain with my daughter in 2001, and we'd forgotten our E111. She was 18 months old. The only treatment they would give her was intravenous fluids to keep her alive. They wouldn't give her any medication, anything whatsoever. It took 4 days to get the E111, and we had to pay for the accommodation costs and get that refunded at the end.
Right or wrong?
I think it was completely wrong, especially with a child.
Okay. Majid?
Yeah, I think that ID checks could be a beginning. Health tourism is a serious problem. Perhaps institute ID checks. I don't think withholding operations, as in this case here with children, for example, is the way forward. But certainly once you know they're not British, you have a way of making sure that people are billed for those services. But of course, this is part of a wider problem. There's a huge funding gap in the NHS, 30 billion over the next 5 years just to keep it at where it is at the moment, let alone to improve the thing. I mean, we've got to look at some serious reforms in a non-partisan way. I mean, some of the political parties are playing political football with this. Perhaps we need a non-partisan commission to look at the future of the NHS.
But do you think this tourism is a serious issue? I mean, BBC had a documentary of a Nigerian woman who ran up a bill of 330,000.
Very serious issue.
But is it, I mean, compared with the overall debt
no.
of the NHS?
I mean, it's not going to, even if we recover all of those costs, it's not going to fill, it's not going to plug the hole that we have coming up in the NHS. It's a huge crisis.
Okay.
I'd put 1p on national insurance, for example. I'd pay extra payment. Yeah.
You say in blue. Yeah.
Mentioning the Nigerian lady who ran up, I read 500,000, not 300,000. She flew first to the United States, where she was turned away. They clearly spotted something that we didn't.
And what do you feel about the issue?
Nick, I'll dispute what you say about paying into the system and getting it for free. We pay into the system. Sure. I think Laura was right on that.
I think Nick was saying that as well.
We don't get it for free. We pay for it. It's just after January the 31st we've all paid our tax bills.
Okay. And the woman to your right, yes, you.
Are you proposing that if you don't pay, you should not have access to the National Health Service? So people, for instance, who have always been on benefits, family hasn't worked for generations, have just been taking, should we stop them? Should we say to them, well, you might be a citizen of this state, but you haven't paid into it, therefore you shouldn't have a right to it? Surely we have to look at people's need. Of course, there are some things that are not emergent, where we shouldn't offer care, but where there is an emergency need, for instance, with that child, or with a burst of ruptured appendix, you have to deal with it. You cannot not deal with emergencies. If people are coming for planned surgeries, of course that's unacceptable. But if people are caught ill in our country, it is right that we look after them, because these are part of our British values. Right. This is part of being British.
They're nodding in agreement.
Whenever I travel abroad, I always take out medical insurance. Why can't people, you know, the cost of a flight for an extra couple of quid, you can take out medical insurance and that'll solve the problem.
I think the operative word there was tourism, wasn't it?
Yes. Rebecca?
Well,
rather than accidents.
Our NHS and our country as a whole is built on the principle of fairness, and I don't think anybody thinks that health tourism is fair per se. But what I would want to see from the government are illustrative figures as to how much it's going to cost to enforce this and how much they actually seek to recoup. I don't want our hospitals being turned into border patrols, and I don't want them turning away people who are in severe need of urgent care. Now, the point I want to make is, why is this issue coming up again? Last week the government were trying to blame GPs not staying open long enough for the crisis in the NHS. Now we're hearing about health tourism. The fact is that the NHS has been stripped of funding. In 2010, the government implemented a reorganisation of the NHS so big you could see it from outer space in an attempt to break it up and privatise it. That's their agenda, that's their direction of travel, and the rest of us are going to suffer as a consequence.
The Public Accounts Committee has said that recouping costs from foreign nationals is chaotic in their report this week. Patrick McLaughlin, what are you going to do about it?
Well, I think we do have to address it. I think there's a couple of points that I'd make. I mean, without wanting to use a well-trodden phrase, I do agree with Nick about the people in this country pay for their health service. It's not something that's free, it's something that costs us a lot of money. I do have sympathy, though, with the gentleman who talked about the experience he had in Spain. You know, if somebody is in urgent need, I wouldn't like to have to wait to find out if they got cover. I think that should be done, and then we should recruit the money afterwards, and that's the way forward. I don't want to see anybody denied emergency medicine if they were so in need of it. That's not the way Britain operates. It's not the way that Britain is going to operate. As far as what Rebecca was saying, I mean, we have committed to put extra money into the health service. We are putting, which was more than what you did at the last general election.
4.6 billion cut from social care.
No, not at all.
2.45 billion deficit last year for hospitals, which is the worst on record so far.
All we get from the Labour Party, the Labour Party always talk about spending money. They don't talk about raising money and earning that money so that we can afford these services. When we came into office, we inherited the largest deficit that any country had inherited.
£700 billion deficit now, Patrick. That's bigger than any Labour government in history.
The woman on my left there.
I'm just wondering if Theresa thinks she can get some help from the Americans to help with our NHS.
What do you mean?
Well, it seems that she's been over and she's talking, and if you look at Hunt and his plans, it does seem that privatisation is knocking on the door.
Okay, which has talked about it. Right, David. I think we'll go on because we've only got, I'd like to get 2 more questions in if I can tonight. Dawn Pollard, let's have your question, please. Dawn.
Do we have an effective opposition in the UK? To quote Theresa May, he can lead a protest, I'm leading a country.
To quote Theresa May, he can what? He can lead a protest, I'm leading a country, is what she said in the House of Commons. Do we have an effective opposition? Who'd like to start on this and who'd like to finish? Rebecca, you start.
Of course we've got an effective opposition. Our job is to hold the government to account, and it's also to set out a vision of the future, that another world is possible. I've already outlined tonight that our economy is failing. The government isn't putting the economy first. Even George Osborne yesterday, and I don't agree with George Osborne very often, he illustrated in his Brexit speech that Theresa May was not putting the economy first in terms of her Brexit negotiations. Labour is. We have a selection of red lines. We're going to rebuild and transform this economy. So yes, there certainly is an effective opposition.
Laura.
Well, I mean, I think it's clear that the opposition is just, first of all, hopelessly divided on the big issue of the day, namely Brexit, where literally one of their MPs cannot even be bothered to turn up for a vote. And if I may, I don't necessarily want to go back to the first issue, but it did strike me
Who couldn't be bothered?
Diane Abbott.
She had a migraine.
Well, of course, I'm sure she did.
But she was taking part in a debate earlier in the day.
But the really important point is, and you can see Labour is failing, and this is the reason why there was so much grandstanding and protesting on the street as opposed to voting in our democratically elected parliament over Trump, is because they can unify over Trump. They want to be the official opposition to Trump, but in fact, we already have the Democrats for that, and they have their hands full. You need to be the official opposition to the Conservatives, and you're being hopeless about it at the moment.
Majid.
No, I think not only is the opposition in disarray, I think it's descending into puerile displays of protest and shouting, and in many instances preferring, even in some cases, violence and justifying violence on the left. Instead of developing serious policy solutions and alternatives
What's
to what
this
we see.
justifying violence?
Well, whether it's on the campuses, banning speakers, or UC Berkeley as an example on a broader left, where that's been set alight today. But there's a tendency that's developing.
It's a thing to say that we justify violence on the left.
I didn't say the Labour Party. I said the left. Sorry, are you speaking?
Well,
you can take responsibility.
You inferred
can take
that it was the
responsibility
Labour
for it if you like.
Speaking about the opposition.
I think the opposition, as well as the broader left, I said, I think that it's descending into authoritarian displays of wanting to shut debate down. And one of the examples of that we see is a lack of vision, as I mentioned earlier, even over what happens after Brexit. I think we need a clear vision emanating from the leader of the opposition that isn't there. We don't know what the alternative is to just resisting Theresa May's policies. We don't know what this country will look like after Brexit. And I think it's about time we started looking towards the future and articulated a liberal vision for a post-Brexit Britain.
All right. The woman on the right there, and then I'll come to the two of you, but you on the right first.
To be seen as the opposition, how can the Labour Party be seen as the opposition if they can't even go together for unity on Brexit? They're so divided that they can't stand on one stance.
Okay, and the woman next to you?
My question is, I don't think that Jeremy Corbyn is totally to blame for the fall of the Labour Party. I think it started with Ed Miliband, and I think that's where the fall of the Labour Party started.
With Ed?
Yes.
Nick Hewer?
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Were you a Labour supporter before?
I've followed Labour since Wilson's 64 victory, yeah, absolutely, step by step. And I was on Andrew Neil's show, that we won't talk about, and met Ed Miliband.
Feel free.
And I thought his handshake was the handshake of a wet fish. And I went to William Hill the next day to try to put a bet on that he would not be leader of the Labour Party at the next general election, and they wouldn't take the bet, and I would have lost it, but I was right. I was absolutely right. And now, sadly, and I'm sorry, Rebecca, he's not a leader, just as Miliband wasn't a leader. And talking about William Hill, if I can just throw in one further thing, I rang them today to try and put a bet on that Trump would not see out his first term. 2-1 that he'd be impeached, 13-8 that he'd resign. Fascinating.
Oh, he's going to serve 2 terms. He's going to serve 2 terms.
And did you place a bet?
They're rotten odds. They must know something that we don't know.
But you're a rich man. You could have doubled your money. The man in the blue there, in the blue pullover. Yes, in the centre. Yes. Labour Party. We're on about what?
I've been a Labour voter all my life.
Yes.
And now I'm in a position where I'm really not sure where to go. So I'm afraid it isn't an effective opposition at the moment.
Are there Corbyn supporters here who want to speak up for him? The man in the white shirt, perhaps, and I'll come to you. Yes.
I think the most effective opposition...
The man in the white shirt first, yes.
I think the most effective opposition will be UKIP in the next election. Once Nigel Farage has been proven right over Brexit, in a couple of years, he will be.
OK, well, that's a fine endorsement of Corbyn. And you, sir, in the second row here.
It's a media campaign against Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah.
I read the newspapers, you watch Sky, everywhere you look at it, it's an attack, and now they seem to withdraw. And no attacks anymore, it's let him fall on his own sword. But, I mean, I don't understand the obsession. I mean, yeah, OK, you're looking and think, could you see him leading the country? I question whether would we have our trust in him, but the attacks on him, it's just terrible. I don't understand. I don't understand the attacks on him, where they come from. He's a decent guy who's trying to look at things from a different way from the normal politician, who, you know, it says one thing and then he'll flip-flop over. It's honestly, it's like the thick of it. It's like watching a Amanda Nucci programme when I see the situation that goes on with it all. Honestly, it's ridiculous.
The simple fact...
On the point that he made, actually, about the media attacking the leader of the opposition, do you think it's unfair?
Well, media attacking the leader of the opposition is nothing new. I was in opposition when the media were attacking our leaders on several occasions. But look, the simple fact about whether they're an effective opposition or not is this. 172 Labour MPs last year had voted no confidence in Jeremy Corbyn to run the Labour Party. If 172 Labour MPs don't think he's suitable to run the Labour Party, how on earth is he suitable to run the country as our Prime Minister?
Okay. All right.
We've got a position at the moment where 3 members yesterday of the Shadow Cabinet resigned and they've not been replaced. Why? Because he's running short of people to do it. All the people who were in Ed Miliband's Shadow Cabinet have almost run away from the front bench. I'm not bothered about whether they're an effective opposition, because what we're going to do as a government is we're going to try and address those people who feel left behind as a result of the referendum and and we'll try to improve those standards, as Theresa May has made perfectly clear, of the questions which we've got to address for those parts of the country that feel left behind.
Thank you.
We will do that.
Rebecca, briefly, please.
We're in effective opposition because Jeremy is a good man. If one thing came out of the Brexit vote, it was that people are sick of an elitist set of politicians that don't speak for them honestly.
You've got to be careful.
They want somebody that delivers a bold vision, and Jeremy is doing that. He's delivering a future that is based on paying your fair share, investing in our economy, high-paid jobs, aspiration where we can have an English dream, the equivalent of the American dream, because at the moment there isn't one. You work your fingers to the bone and you get nowhere. That's why we need to elect the Labour Party as quickly as possible.
Right, thank you. Off the stump for a moment, and to a completely different question to end with, from William Clements, please. William Clements.
Should parents be fined for taking their children out of school?
We'll have to be quick here. Should parents be fined for taking their children out of school during term time? It's gone to the Supreme Court because of a case in the Isle of Wight. We needn't go into the details, but the father complained and it went to the High Court and then it's gone to the Supreme Court. Majid.
Well, look, I sympathise with parents who can't afford to pay peak fares during the peak travel times. Of course, that's one of the reasons cited for why they justify doing this. But, you know, frankly, I think the children's needs come first, and education and taking them out of class can be incredibly disruptive. I think there needs to be some disincentive. I'm not sure fines are the way forward, because usually the sorts of parents that are travelling out off-peak are doing so precisely because they can't afford it. And so I don't think fines are the way forward, but there needs to be some form of disincentive from disrupting the children's education.
Laura Perkins.
Well, I think it is an interesting issue. I don't think fines should be even necessary, and I did initially think the other way around. I think if you're signing up to go to school, you're part of a school community, and you don't just have a duty to your own children who should be in school and should be being educated in that school. I know holidays have an educational benefit, but it's really important, first of all, that your own child is at school. And secondly, you also have a duty to the other children that are there, because if your child falls behind because you've taken them out to go on holiday, then it's disruptive to the other children when your own children have to catch up. So I don't think it's fair as a whole in relation. You know, school is like a family. You have a duty to your children and your school community. And I think there should be solidarity within that school community. You've signed up, you're sending your children there, and you know, you should support each other. And taking children out of school is disruptive, not just for your own child, but for other children as well.
Woman in the second row from the back. Yes.
Yep. Can you explain to me why schools, like our primary school, is then used for 2 days during the referendum for the Brexit vote and local elections, which takes 2 days out of the educational timetable for our children?
But Nick Ure, on the question of children going out for holidays, which is what this is about. Sorry to...
I think if there's one thing that a parent can do for its child is to ensure...
OK, Nick, yes, thank you. Nick.
Yeah. I think the finest thing that a parent can do for its child is to ensure that it gets the best possible education that it can. And I think that they should keep them in school and forego the opportunity to have a warm swim somewhere off the Spanish coast, frankly.
And even for families who can't afford to go during the holidays because all the prices go up? The hotels cost more, the flights cost more?
I dare say they do, but we don't all have to go to Spain for our holidays or to warm climates. We can all go to Devon or wherever it is. The kids' education is the most important thing. And I unusually agree with you, Laura. Thank you.
Rebecca.
Well, unfortunately, even Devon's extortionate if you try to go in the school holidays. And I remember, I've got a 4-year-old, I remember being flabbergasted at the cost increase in school holiday time. So I think we need to take a reasonable and pragmatic approach, and I agree with everything that the panel have said about ensuring that your children has the best education and that it's disruptive. But I think 1 or 2 days here or there in order to secure a cheaper holiday for parents who perhaps can't afford to take their children away in school time seems to be a pragmatic approach to me, and the schools could potentially monitor if it was the same family going away, you know, every single kind of few weeks, then that's not acceptable, obviously. But I think once in a blue moon, then there shouldn't really be an issue with it.
Yes.
I'm a mum to a few boys, and I think one of my issues with the school holidays is that there seems to be this long period of 6 weeks in the summer, and as a working mum, you're juggling constantly who's got the children. What I'd like to see is actually a review of the school, the academic school year. You know, do we have a look at maybe the 3 weeks over Christmas and 5 weeks in the summer? Do we look at moving
You still have the holiday
times?
problem, though, wouldn't you? The prices will still go up.
You do, but I think that's where that flexibility in those conversations come in. We have another issue here that if you have a child in a different area, and if you work in a different area, my children can be off at a different half term than when I would be off. And we need to look at this as as the whole picture and not just going on holiday.
Patrick, briefly.
Well, I think you've got to look at the effect that is had on the rest of the children in that class, if they know that certain people are going away on holiday and they're not. And then on the way that that child has to catch up on that particular subject when he comes back off holiday, and the pressure that puts on the school and the teachers. And the simple fact is, we're paying a lot of money into our education system for children to go to school, and if they miss that schooling, they miss that opportunity.
So you're pro-fines?
I do not think it is right to take children out of school for holidays unless it is very, very exceptional circumstances.
Are you pro-fines?
Yes.
Thank you. So the Supreme Court take notice?
No, I'm sure they won't.
The woman there with the glasses on in black, and I want to just take one last question. Yes?
I think the way the education system works at the moment, specifically with primary schools, children are being taught how to answer exam questions rather than actually being taught how to learn. So, in terms of holidays, I wouldn't condone to take children out of school on a regular basis, but for maybe once a year, I think they can learn a lot more on a few days' holiday than what they'd be reading in a textbook.
And people who homeschool believe they can learn more out of school all the time, which is another matter. Stuart Motter said, I think we've just got 60 seconds for your intriguing question. Let's have it.
Should all politicians have someone sat behind them with a sign saying, he's lying to you?
This is Nigel Farage, who was photographed in the European Parliament with a Labour MEP behind him with a sign with an arrow saying he's lying to you. And the question, should all politicians have somebody sat behind them? I mean, we may only ask the politicians, but we have to go very quickly. Rebecca.
Well, it'd be quite handy. I think the default position is that, a lot of politicians are quite economical with the truth, but that shouldn't be the case. I think we need to put more truth back into politics because people are losing faith in it,
Patrick?
quite frankly.
He's telling the truth. She's telling the truth. He's telling the truth. Go on, quickly.
Oh, right. Thank you.
Yes, you can go.
Right, thank you. I suppose that one of Donald Trump's favourite boasts was that he wasn't a politician. So I think it's an interesting question, and overall I think we try to do the best for our constituents and we try and be as honest and open as we possibly can.
It's like having somebody on your shoulder saying, don't believe everything he says. Very quickly, yes or no? Politicians, liars, tell the truth. You have to be very brief.
No, they shouldn't. There shouldn't be such a sign. Politicians should just tell the truth when they're in front of the media.
OK, Majid?
I want to be upbeat and say that we've got to start trusting each other a lot more and really just, hold people to account, but lawyers get it, bankers get it, teachers get it, clergymen get it, and we keep hating on each other like this, we end up with Donald Trump.
Nick?
I'd like to think that Donald Trump would start telling the truth. He's nothing but a malignant, I suppose, what should we call them, narcissist. And next time your Prime Minister goes to see him, she held his hand on the first date. Make sure she takes a chaperone for the
You're going...
That's right.
Right. Well, the creed of Question Time is all politicians tell the truth when they're on Question Time. It's nice to have them here. But our time's up.
I've been getting away with it.